On the night of August 24th, 410 years after Christ, the Porta Salaria swung open in the darkness, and for the first time in 800 years, an enemy army walked the streets of Rome. But here is the detail that should stop you cold. When Alaric's Visigoths breached those gates, the city they entered still held hundreds of thousands of people, still drew water through functioning aqueducts, still gleamed with marble temples whose bronze doors had not been opened to an invader since a band of Gauls burned the Forum 8 centuries before. Rome did not fall in a single night. It took 15 centuries to build and 5 centuries to come undone. And the question this film exists to answer is not simply how Rome fell, but how a cluster of mud huts on a marshy hilltop above a river ford became the first city in human history to hold 1 million souls. This is the complete story, not a summary, not a highlight. The full arc of the mightiest metropolis the ancient world ever produced, told from the first post holes cut into the Palatine tufa around the 10th century before Christ, all the way to the archaeologist's trowel scraping through medieval rubble to reach an Iron Age burial urn beneath the Forum pavement. You will witness the Etruscan kings who drained the swamp and raised the first great temple on the Capitoline. You will walk the Republican city as it armors itself behind the Servian wall and drinks from its first aqueduct. You will see Augustus clad the old city in Carrara marble, and you will stand inside the Pantheon as Hadrian's dome catches a shaft of Roman light through its open eye 43 meters above the floor. You will move through the insulae of the Subura, 5 stories of noise and cooking smoke, and descend into the hypocausts beneath the baths of Caracalla. You will watch the Aurelian walls rise in desperation, 19 kilometers of brick-faced concrete thrown up against a world closing in. You will hear the silence that followed, when the Forum became a cow pasture and cattle grazed among toppled columns. And you will be there when Renaissance scholars stood on those buried stones and wept at what had been lost, and when Giacomo Boni, at the turn of the 20th century, dug beneath the Forum pavement and found the city before the city, the cremation graves of a people who had no idea what their hilltop village would become. What makes Rome extraordinary is not simply its scale, though no city would match its population for more than 1,000 years after its decline. It is that nearly everything we consider essential to a functioning city was perfected here. The sewer beneath your street descends from the Cloaca Maxima. The concrete in your foundations follows a formula Roman engineers mastered 22 centuries ago. The Basilica, the Civic Forum, the public bath, the triumphal arch, the aqueduct, the legal code that governs property and contract, all of these were born or brought to their highest form in this single bend of the Tiber. Without Rome, the grammar of urban civilization would read differently. And yet, for centuries after the last emperor was deposed in 476, much of this city lay buried under meters of earth and rubble, its temples converted to churches, its marble burned for lime, its name more legend than living memory. Everything you are about to see was once considered gone forever. If you value complete journeys through the greatest cities of the ancient world, told with the patience and precision these stories deserve, subscribe now. Each week we bring another lost world back from the silence of deep time. The story begins where it must, with the ground itself, a river that could be forded, 7 hills that could be defended, and salt flats glittering at the mouth of the Tiber. Let us walk those hills now, before the first stone is laid. The river bends here. It has bent here for millennia, curving westward through a valley of soft volcanic tufa before straightening toward the coast. And at this bend, where the current slows and the channel narrows between gravel banks, the water grows shallow enough to cross on foot. This is the ford. This is where everything begins. 25 kilometers inland from the Tyrrhenian shore, the Tiber passes between a cluster of hills, modest elevations, none rising more than 50 meters above the floodplain, yet steep enough to defend. The Palatine, the Capitoline, the Aventine, the Caelian, the Esquiline, the Viminal, the Quirinal. Their slopes are tufa and clay, their crests dry and open to the wind. Below them, the valley floors collect rainwater and river overflow, breeding marshes thick with reeds. But the hilltops are another world, defensible, drained, commanding views of every approach. The ford determines everything. Whoever controls this crossing controls the movement of salt. The white mineral comes from evaporation pans at the river's mouth, carried inland along a track that later generations will call the Via Salaria, the Salt Road. Salt preserves meat, cures hides, and serves as currency in a world without coinage. The track runs northeast into Sabine territory, and every load must pass through this river crossing. The hills above the ford are not merely habitable, they are strategic. By the 10th century before the Common Era, people have chosen this ground. They are pastoralists and small-scale farmers of the Latial culture, part of a broader network of Latin-speaking communities scattered across the hills and plains south of the Tiber. On the Palatine's summit, they cut post holes into the tufa bedrock and raise oval huts of wattle and daub, walls of woven branches packed with clay, roofed with thatch supported on a central ridgepole. The hut floors are sunk slightly below grade, roughly 4 meters long and 3 wide. Hearths blacken the packed earth inside. Pietro Rosa first identified these cuttings in the 1860s. More than a century later, Andrea Carandini's excavations revealed a sequence of hut foundations spanning Latial culture phases 1 through 3, confirming continuous occupation from approximately 1000 before the Common Era onward. The post holes are not random. They cluster, they align, they suggest a community with spatial order, paths between dwellings, shared open areas, a settlement that knows itself. Below the Palatine, in the low ground of the future forum, the dead rest. Cremation urns shaped like miniature huts, complete with tiny carved doors and pitched roofs, hold the ashes of the earliest inhabitants. These hut urns are among the most eloquent objects of Italian prehistory. The living dwell in huts on the hilltop, and they imagine their dead dwelling in the same form forever. Alongside cremations, inhumation burials appear in later phases, the bodies laid in simple trenches with offerings of coarse pottery and small bronze fibulae. The marshy valley between the hills is not yet habitable. Standing water collects there after every rain, and the Tiber's floods push brackish mud across the low ground. No one builds in the Forum Valley during these centuries. It belongs to the dead and to the water. The living stay high, on the Palatine and the Esquiline and the Quirinal, each hilltop perhaps hosting its own small community, each watching the others across the reedy lowlands. This is not yet a city. There are no walls, no temples, no paved streets. But the logic that will produce a city is already present in the landscape itself. The ford, the salt, the defensible heights, the fertile volcanic soil of the surrounding Campagna, the timber on the hillsides, the clay for pottery and daub. Later centuries will drape this ground in marble and legend. They will speak of a she-wolf, twin brothers, a sacred furrow ploughed around the Palatine. But beneath the myth, the material truth is quieter and older. People came here because the land made sense. The river could be crossed, the hills could be held, the salt could be controlled. And from that elemental calculation, pressed into tufa bedrock as post holes and burned into clay as cremation ash, the longest urban story in the Western world begins its first syllable. For generations, the valley between the hills collects what the hills shed: rainwater, silt, the slow seepage of springs. The low ground where the Palatine faces the Capitoline is marshy, prone to flooding, unsuitable for permanent habitation. The villages on the heights look down into this depression and use it only for the dead. But sometime in the late 7th century before the Common Era, something changes. The water begins to move. Channels appear, first simple ditches cut into the clay, then lined with stones, then roofed with slabs. The engineering is deliberate, systematic, and beyond the scale of any single hilltop village. Someone with authority over labor and resources has decided that this swamp will become dry ground. The great drain that later Romans will call the Cloaca Maxima begins not as the vaulted stone sewer visible today, but as an open channel, roughly cut, directing groundwater and runoff toward the Tiber. Its course runs northwest through the valley floor, and where it empties into the river, a stone arch still stands, rebuilt and enlarged across centuries, but marking the same point of discharge that first turned stagnant marsh into usable land. Tradition names the agent of this transformation. Tarquinius Priscus, first of the Etruscan kings, who according to Roman annalists came from the city of Tarquini and seized the throne around 616 before the Common Era. Whether one man or a dynasty, the archaeological record confirms that Etruscan influence, visible in Bucaro pottery, architectural terracottas, and construction techniques, floods into the settlement precisely when monumental building begins. The Forum Valley receives its first packed earth surface, then gravel, then eventually stone paving. The necropolis beneath is sealed. The dead yield the ground to the living. On the Capitoline Hill, the most ambitious project of the regal period takes shape. The Temple of Jupiter. Optimus Maximus rises on a massive tufa podium, approximately 53 meters wide and 62 meters deep, among the largest temple foundations in the Mediterranean world of its era. 3 Selli house Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. The superstructure is timber-framed, sheathed in painted terracotta revetments in the Etruscan manner, acroteria of warriors and chariots, antefixes of Gorgon faces, all fired in brilliant polychrome. The roof beams are said to be cedar. The cult statue within is terracotta, painted vermilion on festival days. Below the Capitoline, the Regia takes form near the Forum's eastern edge, a small but symbolically potent structure serving as the ritual headquarters of the king and later the Pontifex Maximus. Its trapezoidal plan, rebuilt many times, preserves 6th century foundations of tufa and capellaccio. Nearby, the earliest phase of the Temple of Vesta guards the sacred fire. The city that emerges under the last kings is no longer a cluster of villages. Servius Tullius, tradition holds, constructs an earthen rampart encircling all 7 hills, the Aga Servianus, defining for the first time a single urban boundary. The population within may reach 20 or 25,000. Streets follow the drained valleys. Workshops produce bronze and iron. Imported Greek pottery appears in increasing quantities. Then, in 509 before the Common Era, the year tradition assigns to the expulsion of Tarquinius Superbus and the founding of the Republic, the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus receives its dedication. The coincidence is deliberate in Roman memory. The birth of liberty and the completion of the city's greatest sacred monument fused into a single founding moment. Whatever political upheaval drives the last king from power, the physical city he leaves behind is transformed beyond recognition from the hilltop huts of 2 centuries earlier. The Forum is paved and drained. The Capitoline blazes with painted terracotta. The cloaca carries waste to the river. Rome has crossed the threshold from settlement to city, and the instrument of that crossing was not the sword, but the drain. The new republic inherits a city, but not yet a fortress. For nearly a century after the last king's expulsion, Rome grows outward without enclosing itself. Temples rise, magistrates build, and the population thickens along the valley floors between the hills. Yet no continuous defensive circuit protects the expanding settlement. The threat feels distant. Latin neighbors and Etruscan rivals press close, but the legions hold them at the frontier. The city's confidence is written in stone. The Temple of Saturn, dedicated around 497 before the Common Era at the western end of the Forum, houses the state treasury in its podium. The Temple of Castor and Pollux follows around 484, commemorating the legendary appearance of the divine twins at the Battle of Lake Regillus. Their tall podium, faced in tufa blocks, anchors the Forum's southern edge. Slowly, the open valley that the Etruscan kings drained is becoming a monumental civic space, a place not of kings but of assemblies, magistrates, and law. Then catastrophe arrives. In 390 before the Common Era, a Gallic warband under Brennus overwhelms the Roman army at the Allia River and pours into the city. The sack is devastating. Ancient sources describe fire, slaughter, and months of occupation. Only the Capitoline holds out, its cliff faces and sacred precinct forming a natural citadel. When the Gauls finally withdraw, Rome lies in ashes. The trauma reshapes the city permanently. Within a generation, a massive new fortification rises. The so-called Servian Wall, though its construction belongs to the decades after the Gallic disaster, rather than to King Servius Tullius. 11 kilometers of wall enclose all 7 hills and the valleys between them. The material is Grotta Oscura tufa, quarried from Veientine territory north of the Tiber, territory Rome now controls after conquering Veii in 396. The blocks are enormous, laid in neat ashlar courses, some reaching 60 centimeters in height. Segments survive today near Termini Station, their pale tufa faces still bearing the marks of iron lifting tongs. The wall stands nearly 4 meters thick and perhaps 10 meters high, fronted in places by a deep ditch. Rome has learned that a city without walls is a city without a future. Inside these defenses, the Republican city matures. The Forum Romanum fills with civic architecture, the Comitium for assemblies, the Rostra for public speech, the Tabernae lining its long sides. Temple podiums of dark Anio tufa and pale Gabine stone multiply on the Capitoline, and in the Forum Boreum near the river port. But the city's most revolutionary infrastructure lies underground and far beyond the walls. In 312 before the Common Era, the censor Appius Claudius Caecus commissions two projects that alter Rome's trajectory. The Via Appia drives southeast toward Capua, its basalt paving stones laid on deep gravel beds, a road engineered for military speed and commercial volume. And the Aqua Appia, Rome's first aqueduct, channels water from springs east of the city through a subterranean conduit over 16 kilometers long, emerging inside the walls near the Porta Trigemina. It runs almost entirely underground, invisible but transformative. Fresh water now reaches districts that had relied on the Tiber and on wells sunk into the marshy valley floors. The population, already swelling past 100,000, can grow further. By the mid-3rd century before the Common Era, Rome stands as the undisputed master of peninsular Italy. The city behind the Servian wall is dense, noisy, and increasingly monumental. Tufa temples crowd the sacred precincts, magistrates compete to dedicate public buildings, and the Forum has become the political and judicial heart of a confederation, stretching from the Po Valley to the Greek cities of the south. The Aqua Anio Vetus, a second aqueduct completed in 272, draws water from the Anio River 63 kilometers away. Rome is learning to reach outward for water, for roads, for territory, and to build inward with ever greater density. The cowfield of the early Iron Age is now a city of stone, and the stone is only beginning to rise. The stone is only beginning to rise, but the wealth that will lift it arrives by sea. In 264 before the Common Era, Rome commits its legions to Sicily, and the First Punic War begins. Over the next century and a half, 3 wars against Carthage will pour into the city a torrent of plunder unprecedented in the western Mediterranean. Silver and gold from Iberian mines, ivory from North Africa, Greek statuary seized from Syracuse, Tarentum, and Corinth. The physical city absorbs this wealth like dry ground absorbs rain. Every victorious general returns to celebrate a triumph along the Via Sacra, and every triumph demands a monument. The Forum Romanum, already crowded with Tufa temples, now begins to acquire a new building type borrowed from the Greek world, the basilica. In 184 before the Common Era, Cato the Elder constructs the Basilica Porcia at the Forum's northwest corner, a roofed hall for legal proceedings and commercial business, freeing the open square from the chaos of rain-soaked litigation. 5 years later, the Basilica Aemilia rises along the Forum's northern edge, its long colonnade of tufa piers sheltering bankers and merchants. These are not temples. They are civic machines designed for the daily administration of an expanding state, and their colonnaded interiors will become the architectural ancestor of every courthouse and church nave built afterward. But the deeper revolution is invisible at first. Somewhere in the early 2nd century before the Common Era, Roman builders begin mixing volcanic ash from the Pozzuoli region, Pulvis Putiolanus, with lime and rubble to produce opus cementitium. This concrete sets even underwater. It can be poured into wooden forms to create vaults, arches, and curved walls that cut stone alone could never achieve. The material is cheap, fast, and limitless in supply. It transforms Roman construction from an art of stacking blocks into an art of molding space. The Porticus Aemilia, built near the Tiber docks around 174 before the Common Era, demonstrates the new technology at enormous scale, a warehouse of 50 barrel-vaulted bays stretching nearly 500 meters along the riverbank. Its concrete walls faced with irregular tufa fragments in the technique called opus incertum. Nothing like it exists anywhere else in the Mediterranean. Grain from Sardinia, oil from Africa, wine from Greece flow through its dim interior, stacked in amphorae by the tens of thousands. Downstream, the Emporium district expands with stone quays and stepped landings. The Tiber here becomes an industrial waterfront. Cranes, stevedores, tally clerks, the stench of fish sauce and raw hides. Rome is no longer merely a political capital. It is becoming the commercial throat through which an empire breathes. In 146 before the Common Era, after the sack of Corinth, the Greek architect Hermodorus builds the Temple of Jupiter Stator in the Campus Martius, the first temple in Rome constructed entirely of Pentelic marble. The white stone gleams against the city's familiar palette of grey tufa and warm travertine. It announces a new aesthetic ambition. Rome will dress itself in the materials of the conquered Greek East. Porticos multiply across the Campus Martius, shaded colonnades enclosing gardens, offering shelter for strolling citizens. Temples crowd closer together, their terracotta roofs replaced with marble pediments carved by Greek craftsmen working in Roman employ. The population presses toward 400,000. The city strains against its Servian circuit, spilling beyond the gates into suburbs along the consular roads. Concrete and conquest have made a new Rome possible, denser, taller, vaulted, and clad in stone, stripped from every shore the legions touch. But a city pressing toward 800,000 souls cannot hold its breath forever. The century after 133 before the Common Era tears Rome apart from within, not by foreign siege, but by its own political fury, its own density, its own combustible streets. The violence begins in the Forum itself. The stones that witnessed senatorial debate now witness senatorial murder. Tiberius Gracchus falls in 133, clubbed to death near the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline. His brother Gaius dies 12 years later on the Aventine slope. The precedent is set. Political disputes end in blood, and the city's sacred spaces become killing grounds. The rostra, that ancient speaker's platform adorned with bronze ship prows, displays severed heads. The Forum's travertine pavement absorbs what the drains carry away. The physical city reflects the crisis. The Subura, that dense, narrow-laned district pressed between the Esquiline and Viminal, swells beyond any planned capacity. Timber-framed insulae rise 5, 6, 7 stories on foundations never meant to bear such weight. Cooking fires burn in upper rooms without chimneys. Collapse is routine. Fire is constant. Juvenal will later describe the terror of these streets, but the conditions are already present a century before he writes. The lanes are too narrow for firefighting. Water must be carried by hand from public fountains. At night, the only illumination comes from oil lamps behind shuttered windows and the occasional torch at a crossroads shrine. In 83 before the Common Era, fire consumes the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline, the sacred heart of the Republic, standing since 509. Sulla, victorious in civil war, rebuilds it on a grander scale, importing Pentelic marble columns plundered from the unfinished Olympieion in Athens. He also constructs the tabularium at the Capitoline's eastern face, a massive arcaded structure of tufa and travertine housing the state archives. Its arched facade, still visible today beneath the medieval Palazzo Senatorio, imposes order on the forum's western edge. 11 great arches frame the view down into the valley. It is architecture as authority, the Republic declaring permanence even as its institutions fracture. Pompey answers with spectacle. In 55 before the Common Era, he dedicates Rome's first permanent stone theatre in the Campus Martius, a vast semicircular cavea seating perhaps 17,000, crowned by a temple to Venus Victrix at its summit to circumvent the old prohibition against permanent theatres. Behind the stage building stretches a grand porticoed garden, its colonnades enclosing fountains and plane trees. The complex includes a curia, a meeting hall, where the Senate sometimes convenes. It is in that curia, on the Ides of March in 44 before the Common Era, that Caesar falls. 23 stab wounds at the foot of Pompey's statue. But before that final day, Caesar has already begun remaking the city. He purchases and demolishes an entire block north of the old Forum to build the Forum Julium, a colonnaded rectangular plaza dominated by the Temple of Venus Genetrix. He plans to divert the Tiber, to extend the Campus Martius, to build a theatre rivaling Pompey's against the Tarpeian Rock. He commissions a new Basilica Julia along the Forum's south side. The ambition is monarchical in scale, one man reshaping a city of 750,000 lives. Political graffiti appears scratched into plaster walls and painted in red on stone. Electoral slogans, insults, declarations of allegiance. The city speaks through its surfaces, and beneath those surfaces the Cloaca Maxima still runs, carrying the waste of a population that has doubled and doubled again since the drain was first cut through the Forum Valley. The Republic's infrastructure groans under imperial scale demands. The city needs a single will to match its single body. That will is coming. The single will arrives not as Caesar intended, but through his heir. The young Octavian, barely 19 when the dictator falls, spends 13 years in civil war before standing alone atop the Roman world. By 27 before the Common Era, when the Senate grants him the name Augustus, the city he inherits is vast, combustible, and still largely built of tufa and timber. What follows over the next 4 decades is the most deliberate urban transformation any ancient city has ever undergone. The quarries at Luna, in the Apuan Alps above the Ligurian coast, become the engine of this revolution. Carrara marble, white, fine-grained, capable of holding crisp architectural detail, travels by barge down the coast and up the Tiber. It arrives at the river docks in rough-cut blocks and leaves the stonemasons' yards as column drums, capitals, architraves, and wall veneer panels polished to a soft glow. Augustus does not rebuild Rome in solid marble. The structural cores remain concrete and tufa, but he sheathes the city in a skin of white stone that catches the Italian light and holds it. He divides the city into 14 administrative regions and 265 neighborhood districts, each with its own elected magistrates, its own crossroads shrine to the Lares Compitales. The bureaucratic grid imposes order on 1 million lives. Fire brigades, the vigiles, patrol by night. A permanent urban prefect commands public order. The city, for the first time, is governed as a single organism. His forum rises northeast of Caesar's, enclosed on 3 sides by walls 33 meters high, a deliberate firewall against the teeming Subura pressing close behind. At its heart stands the Temple of Mars the Avenger, vowed before the Battle of Philippi, dedicated in 2 before the Common Era. 8 Corinthian columns of Carrara marble, each 17 meters tall, carry a pediment painted in deep reds and blues. Flanking porticos shelter statues of Rome's legendary heroes, Aeneas, Romulus, the great generals of the Republic, each with an inscribed plaque recording their deeds. The message is architectural. All of Roman history leads to this man, this peace. Agrippa, his general and son-in-law, transforms the Campus Martius from an open field into a monumental district. The original Pantheon rises here in 27 before the Common Era, a rectangular temple, not yet the domed wonder that Hadrian will later build on its foundations. Beside it, Agrippa constructs Rome's first great public baths, fed by a new aqueduct he personally finances, the Aqua Virgo, drawing pure water from springs 8 kilometers east along the Via Colatina, arriving at the city through an underground channel that still feeds the Trevi fountain today. The theatre of Marcellus, begun by Caesar and completed by Augustus in 13 before the Common Era, seats perhaps 15,000. Its 2 tiers of travertine arches, Doric below, Ionic above, establish the vocabulary that the Colosseum will later magnify. Nearby, the Ara Passes Augustae, dedicated in 9 before the Common Era, encloses a sacrificial altar within marble screen walls, carved with processional figures so precise that individual senators can be identified by their features. Acanthus scrolls spiral beneath them, alive with swans, lizards, and insects. Nature itself ordered and fruitful under Augustan peace. The Res Gestae, his own account of his achievements, records the restoration of 82 temples in a single year. The claim is political, but the physical evidence survives in rebuilt podiums and fresh marble cladding across the city. Rome's population reaches or exceeds 1 million souls. The city consumes 200,000 tons of grain annually, drawn from Egypt, Sicily, and North Africa. When Augustus dies in 14 of the Common Era, the city he leaves behind gleams. Marble facings catch the dawn along every major thoroughfare. Obelisks brought from Egypt mark sundials and adorn circus spines. Fountains run day and night. The transformation is not merely cosmetic, it is ideological. A city of brick spoke of republican austerity and chronic neglect. A city of marble speaks of permanence, divine favor, and a peace that intends to last forever. That peace does not last forever. The marble city Augustus left behind endures 5 decades of successors who build upon it, extend it, adorn it, and then, on the night of July 18th, 64 of the Common Era, fire finds the timber-framed shops clustered against the eastern end of the Circus Maximus. Wind carries embers uphill. The flames leap from insula to insula through narrow alleys choked with dry goods, oil, and stored grain. For 6 days the fire burns, dies back, then reignites for 3 more. When it finally exhausts itself, 10 of Rome's 14 regiones lie damaged or destroyed. 3 are leveled to ash and foundation stones. The Forum Romanum survives, but the Palatine Hill is scarred, and the dense residential quarters between the Caelian and Esquiline are gone. What rises from the ashes is not restoration, but reinvention. Nero seizes the devastated heart of the city, perhaps 120 acres between the Palatine, Esquiline, and Caelian for a single residence. The Domus Aurea, the Golden House, sprawls across the burned landscape with colonnaded wings, frescoed corridors, dining rooms sheathed in ivory panels, and ceilings fitted with pipes to shower guests with perfume. At its center, an octagonal hall roofed by a concrete dome with an oculus anticipates the Pantheon by 60 years. An artificial lake fills the valley below, ringed by porticos designed to suggest a rural estate within the city. Before the vestibule stands a bronze colossus 30 meters tall, bearing Nero's features. Yet Nero also rebuilds the city around his palace with new regulations: wider streets, mandatory fire breaks, porticoed facades to shelter pedestrians, limits on timber framing, and requirements for fire-resistant stone in lower stories. These codes reshape Rome's urban fabric permanently. The emperor's fall in 68 brings civil war, and then a dynasty determined to erase his excess. Vespasian drains the artificial lake and plants upon its bed the greatest amphitheatre the world has known. The Amphitheatrum Flavium rises in barely 8 years, an ellipse 189 meters by 156, built of travertine piers and concrete vaults, seating 50,000 spectators beneath a retractable canvas awning. 80 arched entrances allow the crowd to fill or empty in minutes. Below the arena floor, a labyrinth of corridors, animal cages, and mechanical lifts waits in torchlit darkness. Titus dedicates the structure in 80 of the Common Era with 100 days of spectacle. Domitian completes the Flavian reshaping. On the Palatine, his architect Rabirius constructs a palace of unprecedented scale, the Domus Flavia for public audiences, its basilica and throne room lined with colored marble from across the empire, and the Domus Augustana for private life, organized around a sunken peristyle garden sunk deep into the hillside. Below the Palatine's southern slope, Domitian adds a private stadium. In the Campus Martius, he builds another, the Stadium of Domitian, 275 meters long, whose curved footprint still defines the Piazza Navona today. By 96 of the Common Era, the city has absorbed its catastrophe and emerged transformed. The fire erased the cramped Republican streetscape forever. In its place stands a city of wider avenues, monumental concrete vaulting, and imperial architecture scaled to awe. The Colosseum dominates the valley where Nero's lake once shimmered, a deliberate gift of public spectacle where private indulgence had stood. The message is written in travertine and concrete. This city belongs not to one man, but to 1,000,000. And now the city that belongs to 1,000,000 begins to be shaped for them on a scale no urban center has ever attempted. The old Senator Nerva reigns only 16 months, but his adopted successor arrives from the provinces with a soldier's discipline and a builder's ambition. Trajan enters Rome in 98 of the Common Era, and within a decade he will carve an entirely new forum from the living rock of the Quirinal Hill. The architect is Apollodorus of Damascus, a Syrian Greek whose engineering genius matches the emperor's vision. To create the necessary space, workers cut away an entire spur of the Quirinal, removing earth and tufa to a depth matching the height of Trajan's column, 38 meters. The column itself records this feat in its inscription. Into the cleared ground rises the largest imperial forum yet conceived, a vast open plaza flanked by colonnades of Giallo Antico marble, terminated by the Basilica Ulpia, the greatest roofed hall in Rome, 170 meters long, its nave spanned by timber trusses resting on forests of grey granite columns. Beyond the basilica stand twin libraries, Greek and Latin, framing the column between them. Its spiral frieze, 200 meters of continuous relief carved in lunar marble, depicts 2,662 individual figures across 155 scenes of the Dacian campaigns. The carving is so precise that modern scholars identify specific auxiliary units by their equipment. But the markets are what make this complex breathe daily. Cut into the Quirinal's exposed face, the markets of Trajan rise 6 stories, over 150 individual rooms arranged along vaulted corridors of Roman concrete. The Great Hemicycle follows the curve of the Forum's eastern exedra. Inside, tabernae open onto covered streets where grain, oil, wine, pepper, silk, and fish sauce change hands. Light enters through arched windows, footsteps echo on basalt paving. It is the ancient world's most sophisticated commercial architecture. 20 years later, Hadrian surpasses even this. He rebuilds the Pantheon, Agrippa's name preserved on the architrave, but the structure entirely new. The rotunda rises from the ground as a cylinder of brick-faced concrete 6 meters thick, then tapers inward through a series of stepped rings to form a perfect hemisphere. The interior diameter equals the interior height, 43 3/10 meters. At the apex, the oculus, 9 meters across, open to the sky, admits a column of light that rotates through the coffered dome as the hours pass. The concrete itself is graded by weight, heavy basalt aggregate at the base, lighter tufa and pumice near the crown. No reinforcing iron. The dome will remain the largest unreinforced concrete span on Earth for more than 1,300 years. Beneath these monuments, the infrastructure sustains a population exceeding 1 million souls. 11 aqueducts stride across the Campagna on arcades of tufa and brick, delivering over 1 million cubic meters of water every day, a figure documented by Frontinus, the water commissioner under Nerva. The Aqua Claudia and the Anio Novus ride the same towering arcade, their channels stacked one above the other, entering the city at the Porta Maggiore through rusticated travertine arches. This water feeds nearly 600 public fountains, 900 baths, and countless private connections. Lead pipes stamped with imperial names run beneath every major street. Under Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius, the city adds no single monument to rival Trajan's Forum or Hadrian's Dome, but it deepens, thickens, consolidates. The column of Marcus Aurelius will rise in the Campus Martius, its spiral reliefs darker in tone. Rain gods and plague and barbarian desperation carved into the stone. The Antonine Plague arrives in 165, carried westward by legions returning from Parthia, and perhaps 5 million die across the empire. Yet the city endures, its aqueducts still flow, its markets still open at dawn, its baths still steam through the winter afternoons. Rome at its zenith is not merely large, it is a machine for living, refined across generations, fed by 3 continents, and built to last forever. Built to last forever, but built for whom? The Regionary catalogues, compiled in the 4th century but reflecting conditions stretching back to the Antonine age, record 46,602 insulae in the city, and only 1,790 domus. The numbers tell the truth that marble facades conceal. Rome is a city of renters, of narrow stairways, of cooking smoke drifting from upper-floor windows, where families of 4 share 2 rooms. The insulae of the Subura rise 5, 6, 7 stories. Timber-framed upper floors stacked above ground-level tabernae built in brick and concrete. Evidence from Ostia, Rome's port colony, preserves what the capital itself has lost. Apartment blocks with balconies overlooking interior courtyards, shared latrines at ground level, terracotta pipes carrying water only to the lowest floors. Above the second story, residents carry their water in jars. Light comes from small windows and oil lamps, tens of thousands of terracotta lamps burning through the Roman night, their soot blackening ceilings across the city. Dawn brings the city to its feet. Bakers who have worked since the 3rd watch slide round loaves from wood-fired ovens, the grain already milled by donkey-driven rotary mills whose basalt stones survive in bakeries excavated across the city. The Annona, the state grain distribution, feeds perhaps 200,000 eligible recipients, free adult male citizens who collect their monthly allotment of grain, later baked bread, at designated distribution points. The system requires an empire-wide logistics chain. Egyptian wheat loaded at Alexandria, shipped to Puteoli, and later to Portus, Trajan's great hexagonal harbour at the Tiber mouth, then barged upriver to the Horea, the massive state granaries near the Emporium district below the Aventine. By mid-morning the tabernae are open. Cobblers, fullers, coppersmiths, and sellers of garum line the streets. Amphorae stamped with their origin, Vatican olive oil, Gallic wine, African fish sauce, stack in warehouses and shop fronts. The noise is relentless. Juvenal complains of wagons banned from daytime streets that thunder through at night instead, of hammers and hawkers and the endless human press. By early afternoon, the city migrates toward the Thermae. Bathing is not luxury, it is civic routine, available for a quadrans, the smallest bronze coin. The great Imperial bath complexes offer far more than hot water. Their precincts contain exercise yards, gardens, libraries, lecture halls, and sculpture galleries. The hypocaust system drives heated air beneath raised floors and through hollow walls, consuming forests of firewood delivered daily by barge. The sequence moves from the warm tepidarium to the hot caldarium to the cold plunge of the frigidarium, and the hours pass in conversation, gossip, and the slow rituals of oil and strigil. Religious life saturates every corner. Household lararia, small shrines holding painted figurines of the Lares and Penates, occupy niches in shops and apartments. At the Campus Martius, the Isium Campensi draws worshippers to the Egyptian goddess Isis, her cult one of many Eastern mysteries, flourishing alongside traditional Roman observance. Mithraeum after Mithraeum hides in basements and cellars, their narrow benches flanking relief panels of the bull-slaying god, lit by flickering lamps in windowless rooms. And at the edges of the city, the dead accumulate. Columbaria, collective tombs with hundreds of small niches for cremation urns, line the roads beyond the gates. Wealthier families commission carved sarcophagi. Beneath the surface along the Via Appia and Via Nomentana, the earliest tunnels of what will become the catacombs are already being cut into the soft tufa, narrow galleries where the Christian and Jewish dead are laid in horizontal niches sealed with terracotta tiles. The living city above them hums on, indifferent, magnificent, and impossibly crowded, 1,000,000 lives burning like oil lamps in the Roman dark. The lamps begin to gutter. Sometime around 165 of the Common Era, soldiers returning from Mesopotamia carry something invisible through the gates, a pestilence that will burn for 15 years. The Antonine Plague, likely smallpox, sweeps through the insulae and tenements with terrible efficiency. At its peak, ancient sources claim 2,000 deaths a day in the capital alone. Even allowing for exaggeration, the demographic blow is staggering. Funeral pyres burn beyond the walls. Entire apartment blocks stand empty. The physician Galen, who witnesses it firsthand, describes the blackened skin, the bloody cough, the stench of mass death in narrow streets where ventilation barely exists. Marcus Aurelius dies on campaign in 180, and with him dies the long equilibrium. His son Commodus is strangled in his bath on the last night of 192. The year of the 5 emperors follows. Civil war fought not at the frontiers but in the streets of Rome itself. Septimius Severus prevails, and his dynasty builds grandly. The arch of Septimius Severus rises at the Forum's northwest corner in 203, its marble reliefs celebrating Parthian victories. The Septisodium, a towering ornamental facade, adorns the Palatine's southeast flank. But these are the last great additions to the imperial center for generations. After 235, the empire fractures. 26 claimants to the purple rise and fall in 50 years. Barbarian raids penetrate deep into Italy. The Juthungi reach the Po Valley in 270. For the first time since the Gallic catastrophe nearly 7 centuries earlier, Rome faces the prospect of hostile armies at its gates, and the city has no walls. The old Servian circuit, built of tufa blocks in the 4th century before the Common Era, has long since been swallowed by urban expansion. Neighborhoods sprawl far beyond it in every direction. The city is naked. Aurelian acts with desperate speed. Beginning in 271, work gangs, soldiers, civilians, perhaps prisoners, raise a new circuit of walls enclosing the entire inhabited area. 19 kilometers of brick-faced concrete, 3.5 meters thick, 8 meters high, punctuated by 381 square towers at intervals of roughly 30 meters. 18 major gates pierce the line. The Porta Appia opening onto the road south, the Porta Flaminia facing north, the Porta Tiburtina framing the channels of the Aqua Marcia and Aqua Tepula as they enter the city atop the gate itself. The construction is hasty, pragmatic, brilliant in its economy. Existing structures are incorporated wholesale. The Pyramid of Cestius becomes a bastion. The Castra Praetoria forms the northeast corner. Sections of aqueduct arcades serve as ready-made curtain wall. The Amphitheatrum Castrense is sliced in half, its outer arches sealed with brick to become defensive ramparts. These walls confess a truth the marble monuments never would. The city is contracting. The population, perhaps still 600,000 or 700,000, no longer fills the space it once commanded. The great building projects cease. Temples go unrepaired. The Forum's pavement cracks, and weeds push through. When Diocletian finally visits Rome in 303, the first reigning emperor to see the city in years, he commissions the largest baths ever built, covering 13 hectares northeast of the Viminal. Their frigidarium alone spans a space so vast that Michelangelo will one day fit an entire church inside it. But Diocletian governs from Nicomedia, from Split, from Milan, anywhere but Rome. The baths are a gift to a city the emperor no longer needs. By 305, Rome remains immense, still fed by its aqueducts, still served by its baths and granaries. but the energy has shifted. The walls stand as the city's newest and most honest monument, not a celebration of conquest, but an admission that the world beyond has grown dangerous, and that even the eternal city must now defend itself against the dark. The shift comes not through decree alone, but through stone. In 312, on the eve of battle at the Milvian Bridge, the general who will remake this city defeats his rival Maxentius and enters Rome as sole master of the West. Constantine does not tear down the old city. He completes what Maxentius began. The enormous basilica in the Forum, its 3 coffered concrete vaults soaring 35 meters above the nave, the largest roofed interior Rome has ever known. But he places within it a colossal seated statue of himself, 12 meters tall, its marble head alone 2.5 meters high, its gaze fixed not on the old gods but on something new. Near the Colosseum, the Senate erects a triumphal arch in 315. It is magnificent and telling. The sculptors carve fresh Constantinian friezes, squat, frontal, hieratic, but they strip older monuments for the finest panels. Trajanic reliefs depicting Dacian campaigns, Hadrianic roundels showing imperial hunts, Aurelian battle scenes, all are reset into the new arch, the earlier emperors' faces recarved into Constantine's likeness. The city is beginning to consume its own past. The Edict of Milan in 313 grants Christians legal standing across the empire. Within a decade, Constantine raises basilicas that will define a new sacred geography. On the Caelian Hill, the Basilica of the Lateran rises as the Bishop of Rome's cathedral, a vast 5-aisled hall sheathed in marble and gold. Across the Tiber, on the Vatican Hill, over a humble necropolis where tradition places the Apostle Peter's burial, workers fill in tombs with earth and rubble to create a level platform. Atop it rises Old St. Peter's, its nave stretching nearly 120 meters, its transept crossing directly above a small edicula marking the sacred grave. The bones beneath that shrine will not be excavated for another 16 centuries. Santa Croce in Gerusalemme, built within the Caesarian palace, houses relics of the true cross. These are not temples in the Roman sense, no sacrificial altar before a cult statue in a dim cellar. They are gathering halls, basilican in form, flooded with light, designed for congregations numbering in thousands. The architectural grammar of Roman law courts and market halls becomes the skeleton of Christian worship. Yet the old religion does not vanish overnight. Temples still stand open through Constantine's reign. The emperor himself holds the office of Pontifex Maximus. The transformation is gradual, layered, contested. But in 330, Constantine dedicates a new capital on the Bosporus, Constantinople, built on the bones of ancient Byzantium, furnished with art stripped from Greek sanctuaries. The administrative heart of empire shifts eastward. Rome keeps its senate, its prefect, its symbolic primacy. But the emperors rarely come. The Theodosian edicts of 391 and 392 close the temples formally. Sacrifices cease. The eternal flame of Vesta, tended for over 1,000 years, is extinguished. The altar of victory is removed from the Senate House despite the eloquent protests of the senator Symmachus. Around 404, the last gladiatorial combat takes place in the Colosseum. The amphitheater that once roared with 50,000 voices falls quiet. Rome in these decades is still vast, still fed by its aqueducts, still beautiful in its marble and bronze. But the energy flows elsewhere. Churches multiply while temples stand empty, their bronze doors green with neglect. The great public baths still function. The grain ships still arrive from Africa. The population, though diminished, perhaps numbers several 100,000. The Aurelian walls still hold. But beyond those walls, the world has changed. Germanic confederations press the frontiers. The Western court shelters in Ravenna, behind marshes. Rome waits, immense, proud, increasingly alone, a city of churches rising among temples no one enters, its ancient skyline unchanged, but its meaning already transformed. The cross has replaced the eagle, and the gates, for now, still hold. The gates do not hold. On the 24th of August, 410 of the Common Era, slaves inside the city open the Porta Salaria. Alaric's Visigoths pour through the breach in the deep hours of night, torches guttering against the Aurelian brickwork. For the first time in 800 years, since the Gallic catastrophe of 390 before the Common Era, a foreign army walks the streets of Rome. 3 days of plunder follow. The Visigoths are Christian, Arian in creed, and Alaric orders the basilicas of Peter and Paul treated as sanctuaries. Those who shelter inside survive, but the palaces on the Aventine and Caelian burn. The great houses of the senatorial aristocracy, their silver plate, their ivory diptychs, their silk hangings, are stripped bare. The Forum of Peace, already damaged by fire under Commodus, loses whatever bronze fittings remain. Smoke drifts across the Palatine, where the Imperial residence stands largely empty, its painted corridors echoing with foreign voices. The shock radiates across the Mediterranean world. In Bethlehem, Jerome writes that the city which captured the whole world is itself captured. In Hippo, Augustine begins composing The City of God, arguing that Rome's fall is not the failure of Christianity, but the inevitable fate of all earthly cities. The theological response outlasts the physical damage, and the damage, in truth, is selective. Alaric withdraws southward within days, dying before the year ends in Calabria. Rome begins to recover. The population, perhaps still 200,000, repairs what it can. The Colosseum still hosts spectacles into the 440s. Churches receive new endowments. The grain fleet continues, though its reliability wavers. Then comes the deeper wound. In June of 455, Geiseric's Vandals sail from Carthage and enter Rome through the Porta Portuensis. This sack lasts 14 days, methodical, thorough, unhurried. The Vandals strip the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus of its gilded bronze roof tiles, tiles that have crowned the Capitoline since the temple's last restoration. They carry away treasures reportedly taken from Jerusalem's temple by Titus nearly 4 centuries earlier. The menorah and sacred vessels depicted on the arch of Titus, now loaded onto ships bound for Africa. Bronze statues vanish from forums and basilicas. The imperial palace on the Palatine is emptied of whatever portable wealth remains. Empress Licinia Eudoxia and her daughters are taken as captives. The city that survives the Vandal sack is diminished in a way the Visigothic plunder was not. The stripping of bronze, roof fittings, door hinges, clamps holding marble veneer to walls begins a slow architectural unraveling. Without their metal clamps, marble panels loosen and fall. Rain enters roofless temples. The great public buildings begin their long transition from monuments to quarries. 2 more decades of shadow emperors follow, each more powerless than the last. The Western court at Ravenna produces rulers who control little beyond Italy, and often not even that. Germanic generals, Ricimer, Gundobad, Orestes, make and unmake emperors at will. Rome itself becomes peripheral to its own empire's politics. In 476, the Germanic officer Odoacer deposes the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus, a name carrying both the city's founder and its greatest builder, now borne by its last and most insignificant ruler. Odoacer sends the imperial regalia to Constantinople. No new Western emperor is proclaimed. The legal fiction dissolves quietly. Rome does not die in 476. The Senate still meets. The grain dole still functions, though reduced. The Colosseum still stands, its travertine facade intact. But the population has fallen below 100,000 and continues to drop. Entire districts on the Aventine and Caelian empty out. The great aqueducts still flow, but maintenance falters. Gardens and orchards appear where insular once packed families 6 stories high. The ancient skyline, temple pediments, gilded rooftops, the Colossus near the amphitheatre has lost its gleam. Bronze is gone. Marble weathers without repair. The city that once held 1 million souls settles into a quieter existence, its churches lit, its forums darkening, its silence deepening with each passing year. The silence deepens into centuries. What follows is not a single catastrophe, but a long, slow burial. The ancient city sinking beneath its own debris, its monuments consumed by the very people who shelter among them. The Gothic wars deliver the cruelest blow. Between 535 and 554, armies of Justinian and the Ostrogothic kings fight across Italy, and Rome changes hands 5 times. Belisarius enters in 536, Totila besieges and captures it in 546, and during these campaigns the aqueducts are cut. The Aqua Claudia, the Annio Novus, the Aqua Marcia, one by one, their channels are breached where they cross the Campagna on vulnerable arcades. Without water, the great thermae fall silent. The baths of Caracalla, the baths of Diocletian, their furnaces cold, their pools dry, their gardens withering. The population, already diminished, collapses further. By the 7th century, perhaps 20 to 30,000 souls remain in a city built for 1 million. The Forum Romanum fills with earth. Floods from the Tiber deposit silt. Collapsed walls crumble into rubble that no one clears. The ancient pavement, the basalt slabs laid under Augustus, disappears beneath 4, 6, eventually 8 meters of accumulated debris. Cattle graze among the half-buried columns of the Temple of Saturn. The space acquires its medieval name, Campo Vaccino, the cow field. The sacred way, once trodden by triumphal processions, becomes a muddy track between vegetable plots. Yet the city does not vanish entirely. It transforms. The Pantheon survives because in 609, Pope Boniface IV consecrates it as Santa Maria ad Martyrs, the first pagan temple officially converted to Christian worship. Its bronze doors remain. Its dome holds. The Curia Julia, where the Senate once deliberated, becomes the Church of Sant'Adriano. The Temple of Antoninus and Faustina gains a Baroque facade above its ancient columns, preserved precisely because it serves the parish of San Lorenzo in Miranda. What the Church claims, the Church maintains. What the Church does not claim, the quarrymen take. The Colosseum becomes Rome's greatest quarry. Its southern wall collapses, whether from earthquake in the 9th century or deliberate extraction remains debated, and for generations, carts haul away travertine blocks for new palaces and churches. The Palazzo Venezia, the Palazzo Barberini, the steps of St. Peter's all contain Colosseum stone. Bronze clamps holding the blocks together are prized out, leaving the distinctive pockmarks visible on every surviving surface today. Noble families fortify what remains. The Frangipane clan builds a fortress into the Colosseum's arches in the 12th century, its crenellated tower rising above the ancient tiers. The Savelli construct their stronghold atop the theatre of Marcellus, its medieval battlements crowning Augustan travertine. The Torre dei Conti, the Torre delle Milizie, medieval towers sprout from ancient foundations, turning imperial monuments into baronial castles. Beneath the living city, the ancient one accumulates silence. Streets that once echoed with 1,000,000 voices lie sealed under meters of fill. Mosaic floors, painted walls, lead pipes stamped with imperial names, all rest in darkness, waiting. The medieval city walks unknowingly atop its predecessor, building churches over temples, piazzas over fora, houses over palaces. Layer presses layer layer. 9 centuries pass in this slow compression, and the ancient city becomes geology, a stratum of broken marble, charred timber, and shattered terracotta, pressed between the living surface above and the virgin clay below. The stones wait in their darkness, patient as the earth itself. The stones do not wait forever. Sometime in the early 15th century, a Tuscan scholar named Poggio Bracciolini climbs the Capitoline Hill and looks out over what remains. He sees columns jutting from mounds of earth, arches half swallowed by vegetation, marble entablatures serving as troughs for livestock. In his De Varietate Fortunae, completed in 1431, he records the Forum as a wasteland of rubble, where pigs root among fragments of inscriptions. His grief is precise. He names specific monuments, notes their condition, measures their decay against the ancient texts he has read. This is something new. For the first time in 1,000 years, a human mind looks at these ruins not as a quarry or a foundation for something else, but as evidence of a vanished world demanding recovery. The Renaissance gaze sharpens across the following decades. Architects measure, sketch, and calculate. Flavio Biondo's Roma Instaurata of 1446 attempts the first systematic topography, matching ancient literary descriptions to surviving remains. By 1519, Raphael writes to Pope Leo X, proposing a comprehensive survey of the ancient city, a measured drawing of every ruin before the lime kilns consume them entirely. The letter is a plea against destruction. Marble is still being burned for mortar at an appalling rate. Raphael estimates that in the 12 years since Julius II's pontificate began, entire temples have vanished into builders' furnaces. Piero Ligorio, working through the mid-1500s, produces an enormous illustrated map of ancient Rome, reconstructing the city from fragments, coins, and inscriptions. His methods mix genuine scholarship with invention, yet his ambition is revolutionary, to see the ancient city whole beneath the modern one. 3 centuries of slow accumulation follow. Grand tour travelers of the 17 and 1800s sketch the Colosseum draped in ivy, the Forum's 3 standing columns of Castor rising from the cowfield, the arch of Septimius Severus buried to its middle register in earth. Piranese's engravings render the ruins with a drama that borders on worship, vast, shadowed, overwhelming in scale. Then the spade arrives in earnest. Under Napoleonic administration in the early 1800s, systematic clearing begins at the Forum and Colosseum. Earth is removed, medieval accretions stripped away, ancient pavement levels sought. The work continues through Italian unification. Rodolfo Lanciani, beginning in 1893, publishes his Forma Urbis Romae, 46 enormous sheets mapping every known ancient remain beneath the modern street plan, a palimpsest rendered legible at last. The most revelatory work belongs to Giacomo Boni. Starting in 1898, he excavates the Forum not merely to expose monuments, but to read stratigraphy, layer by layer, century by century, descending through Imperial marble, Republican tufa, and finally reaching the Iron Age necropolis beneath the pavement. Cremation urns shaped like miniature huts emerge from the virgin soil. The city's deepest memory surfaces into daylight for the first time in nearly 3,000 years. Meanwhile, fragments of the Severan marble plan, the Forma Urbis Romae carved under Septimius Severus around 203 of the Common Era, are recovered from the wall of the Church of Saints Cosmas and Damian, where they had been reused as building material. 1,186 fragments survive from what was once a map spanning approximately 650 square meters, incised on 150 marble slabs mounted to a wall in the Templum Pacis. Each fragment is a puzzle piece, a street corner, a portico, a theatre's curved seating rendered in precise plan view. Scholars spend generations fitting them together, recovering the ancient city's skeleton one slab at a time. By 1900, the Forum stands cleared to its ancient levels. Columns rise clean against the sky. Temple podiums emerge sharp-edged from the earth that buried them. The cowfield is gone. In its place, the topography of power is legible again. Basilicas, rostra, sacred ways, triumphal arches aligned along axes that once organized an empire. The ancient city, compressed into geology by 9 centuries of silence, has been read back into existence through patience, measurement, and the careful removal of everything that time deposited above it. And yet the Forum, cleared and legible again, is not a museum. It is a foundation. Every city that has ever gathered its citizens in a public square, channeled water through pipes beneath its streets, or sheltered its courts of law beneath a vaulted roof, carries something of this bend in the Tiber within its bones. The legacy is not metaphor. It is concrete, literally. Opus cementitium, the volcanic aggregate mixed with lime that Roman engineers perfected, made possible the dome, the vault, the aqueduct arcade, and the multi-story warehouse. The Pantheon's unreinforced concrete dome, spanning 43 1/3 meters, stood for 19 centuries as the largest in the world. Brunelleschi studied it before raising his cupola in Florence. Every domed Capitol building on earth descends from that single oculus, open to the rain and the stars. The aqueduct taught cities to drink. Before Rome, urban populations depended on wells and rivers. 11 aqueducts feeding over 1 million cubic meters daily demonstrated that a city could grow beyond the limits of its local water table. The principle traveled with the legions, Segovia, Nimes, Carthage, Constantinople, and it never left engineering practice. Modern municipal water systems are the aqua marcia's children. The sewer taught cities to breathe. The cloaca maxima, begun under the Etruscan kings to drain a marsh, became the prototype for urban sanitation infrastructure that every modern metropolis requires to survive. The Basilica, a Roman law court with its long nave, side aisles, and apse, became the architectural template for Christian worship. Old St. Peter's borrowed the form directly. Every cathedral in Europe carries the basilica's proportions in its skeleton. The grid-planned colony, replicated from Timgad to Gloucester, established the principle that a city could be rationally designed before a single inhabitant arrived. Roman colonial planning survives in the street grids of Turin, Zaragoza, and dozens of cities that began as legionary foundations. Roman law, codified, debated, refined across a millennium, became the basis of civil law systems governing half the modern world. The concepts of legal personhood, contract, property, and public interest passed through Justinian's digest into the legal traditions of continental Europe, Latin America, and beyond. Beneath the church of San Clemente, near the Colosseum, 3 levels descend through time. A 12th-century basilica stands atop a 4th-century church, which rests on a 1st-century Mithraeum, which sits on Republican-era foundations. Water still runs through the lowest level, an ancient stream channeled into drains 2,000 years ago, still flowing in the dark. This single site compresses Rome's entire story into a vertical cross-section no wider than a city block. 30 centuries of continuous habitation, layered one atop another, each generation building on the walls of the last. On the Campagna at sunset, the ruined arcades of the Aqua Claudia stride across golden grass towards the hills. The Colosseum catches the first light of dawn, its travertine scarred by earthquake, quarrying, and time, yet still standing, still the template for every arena built since. The Pantheon's bronze doors still open on their original hinges. Rome was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980, and every foundation trench dug within the Aurelian walls still opens windows into antiquity. Excavations continue beneath the Imperial Fora, beneath Trajan's markets, beneath piazzas where modern Romans drink coffee above buried temples. The city is never finished being discovered. What the stones still tell is this, that once, on a cluster of marshy hills above a fordable river, a settlement grew into the mightiest city the ancient world ever produced, and that its principles of engineering, law, urban design, and civic life became the inheritance of every city that came after it. The Tiber still bends, the hills still rise, the stones still speak. Thank you for walking through these ancient streets across all 15 chapters. If this journey through the deep past moved you, consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss the next story the stones have to tell.